Welcome to day 3 of the Inclusive Instruction Speaker Series. So we have seen a lot of you on day 1 and day 2. We're thrilled that you're still here with us. So we're going to be hearing from Dr. Van Bailey today. I'm going to hand it to Dr. Snyder first, just to do a little bit of level setting for us for this session. So take it away, Jeanette.
Good morning, everyone. Again, just to echo what Dr. Renzi said, it's such a pleasure to see all of you here for our new faces, and of course, those who've been part of, again, our mini cohort. I want to just, again, thank Dr. Bailey for being here. And again, just echoing the sentiment that we're just excited to have our own folks, our own Maryland experts in the room with us to share. So as a reminder to those who've been a part of this series and those who are just joining us today, we want everyone to just remain on mute throughout the presentation. Dr. Bailey is going to give us a really rich presentation for the next 20 minutes or so, and then opening up the rest of our time for questions and answers. So feel free to use that chat feature as much as possible during the lecture portion. It will be monitored. So all of your questions, your comments, any quotes that resonate, resources that resonate, please load up that chat feature. Again, we will be monitoring it, and then we'll have plenty of time to unmute, to ask questions and engage with Dr. Bailey. If you, again, to remind you, if you want to ask questions anonymously, please private chat Carrie, Darren, or myself, and also to ensure that you're seeing the speaker when possible, hit that speaker view up at the top. And we were ready to get started.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here, happy to be in community, happy to be sharing space and to be on your third day in discussing really important topics. We're going to be talking about intersectionality today. We're going to do as much as we can about intersectionality within 20 to 30 minutes, understanding that it is a whole framework and lots of studies have gone into it, but we're going to do our best. We're going to first start off with a land acknowledgement. We are standing on the or UMD is on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who are among the first in the Western Hemisphere to encounter European colonists. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. So please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. In addition, I would like to do a labor acknowledgement. So we must acknowledge that much of what we know in this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development through history and across time, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, chattel slavery, and Jim Crow. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we must acknowledge the tremors of that violence through the generations and the resulting impact that can be felt and witnessed today. So we're just going to go ahead and get started right into the presentation. Our time together is going to be pretty simple. You're going to learn a little bit about me. We're going to have some shared language and some frameworks to talk about intersectionality. And then we're just going to get right into questions and conversation. I want to be able to be in community with you all and engage in these things. I know that there might be some what ifs, there might be some even, some nervousness to even delve into this topic, and want to be able to just honor everybody's full humanity in the questions and conversation. So a little bit about me. I started here at UMD College Park as the Director of Bias Incident Support Services back in February. I come from the campus kind of cultural center world. I've established 2 LGBTQ centers, the first one at Harvard and the next one at the University of Miami. Just started a cross-cultural center at George Mason University. So much of the work that I do is focused on identity, and much of the work that I do in establishing cultural centers and identity-based centers are all from the place of intersectionality and being able to honor and understand the intersections of identities that we're dealing with when we're talking about our students. I'm also a consultant to nonprofits, universities, and community organizations as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have a deep, deep commitment to engaging in the hard discipline and work of anti-racism and gender inclusion. I do have my doctorate, but I must like punishment because I'm back in school, getting getting my MSW, and much of that is because of the trauma that I have witnessed, particularly amongst employees and folks who do this work on the staff side, who support students, particularly in cultural centers and the work that I do. That I have yet to encounter a staff member who has not dealt with some level of trauma. And how do we bring our whole selves to the work, and how do we honor our whole selves in the work and the trauma that we might be carrying as a result of the jobs that we do and the professions that we've chosen to do. So that's why I'm back getting an MSW. That is why I'm deeply involved in doing bias incident support services and the work here on campus, because we do come from a trauma-informed lens. We are not an investigative body. Rather, we try to hold and honor people who have been harmed by different incidents and really center their pain and work with them from there. So that's a little bit about me. I want us to come from a very just common shared understanding before we get started, right? When we're talking about identity, when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about bias, and in this engagement and intersectionality, we have to understand that we are not separate from society, right? That these individual acts and these individual incidents are really a part of larger systems and a larger culture as it relates to understanding trauma, as it relates to understanding identity. So we must engage beyond the individualism of different acts that we might encounter with. And in order to understand intersectionality, we have to come from a systems approach in understanding that, people's identities do not work in a vacuum, right? That they are interconnected, and that they bring, when we talk about our students, they're bringing their whole selves, which includes trauma, which includes their individual identities, but also their identities as they intersect with one another. And we'll delve deeper into what that means. I want to show a video, and I think that it's a good video for us to just have some common understanding about what we mean by opening up ourselves to the whole student, right? That we all must come to this conversation around identity from a place of emotionality, which oftentimes is driven out by institutions due to a culture of respectability and professionalism. But we know that empathy raising only improves organizations and increases connectiveness. So if I'm connected to you and I feel a connectedness to you, I'm less likely to actively hurt you. And I'm more likely to increase my own self-awareness around my own pain points, my own history, my own trauma. And so when we talk about empathy, which this video will discuss, we want to be able to understand that it reduces disconnection and it finds connection through common stories, feelings, and empathy raising on college campuses only increases our ability to build community with one another. And really, you have to ask yourself the larger question, do you care about the people in the campus community? So when we're talking about intersectionality and we're talking about honoring the whole person, we have to understand that we are tapping into a level of emotionality and empathy that many of us in institutions try to drive out, right? And that is also a systems-based approach to remove ourselves from emotionality, to remove ourselves from actually understanding the interconnectedness of us all and understanding how do we honor people's full humanity, as well as their pain points, as well as the discrimination that they might experience. So this video is by Brene Brown. And for folks who aren't familiar with Brene Brown, she is a social worker. She works with, she has written many books, particularly around vulnerability and empathy. And this is about a 2-minute video for how do we think about trauma in communities and centering our most burden, and how do we raise our empathy amongst us. So here we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it Very different than sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. I hope folks appreciated that video. I hope it, opens up a little bit of heart space and understanding once again, the importance of interconnectedness and the importance of, particularly when our students are coming with us and talking about their whole selves and experiences, what does it mean for us to actually sit with them, hold space with them, not try to silver line things, right? Creating holding spaces within classroom spaces are incredibly important. And we're going to, talk about some shared language as to why that's so important. So, I'm just going to leave you all with just a few definitions, which is around equity, right? Intersectionality, the big topic that we're talking about, allyship, and the difference between cultural competency and cultural humility. And so, the first thing is around equity, right? Where we try to have an understanding and gives people the need to enjoy their full, healthy lives, right? We know that equality and contrast oftentimes aims to ensure that everyone gets the same thing, right? In order to enjoy full and healthy lives, but equity really tries to give people what they need, which is the difference between equity and equality. So like equity, equality aims to promote fairness and justice, but it can only work if everybody starts from the same place, right? And we know that we don't all start from the same place as it relates to systems, as it relates to power, as it relates to privilege. And so one of the things that I ask people to create in their minds, when we're thinking about equity, is to ask the larger question around, who's here and who's not here and why aren't they here, right? And getting to the question around why aren't they here really begins to understand who are our most burdened people, and how do we work from a place of centering our most burdened folks, because when we center our most burdened folks, everybody wins. There is nothing that we can create for our most burdened folks that other people will not gain, some level of privilege or some level of enjoyment from. Intersectionality we oftentimes talk about it as just identity, right? But intersectionality is a theoretical framework. So when we talk about intersectionality, it is a framework, right? Intersectionality understands people's aspects of people's personal, social, and political identities and how those combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege, right? So what we mean by that are examples of aspects around gender, caste, sex, race, class, sexuality, religion, disability, physical appearance, height, right? All of these things, when we talk about the intersections of these things, play into intersectionality. So oftentimes what people will mistake is talking about intersectionality as if it is just different identities. I am an intersectional person. That doesn't, yes, and intersectionality really gets to how we deal with different systems of discrimination. So for me as a Black trans person, who has different level of abilities, sometimes it is hard to parse out which aspect of my identity am I experiencing this discrimination. When I look at particular laws, when I look at particular modes of understanding gender in the society, is it related to my Blackness or is it related to gender identity? Not sure, right? And we shouldn't be able to parse out these aspects of our identities because that's not how we function. So the reason that, I'm bringing up right now cultural humility versus cultural competency is because oftentimes the conversation on intersectionality is kind of just set on cultural competency and understanding of skills that we have, and understanding of just kind of base level of identities. I see you. I understand that there are different cultures here. I understand that there are different people within my classroom space. But cultural humility really begins to act as another framework for us to be in an ongoing process of self-exploration and self-critique, and is combined with a willingness to learn for others. Cultural humility simply says, I don't know enough and I don't know it all. And it creates a leveling, plain leveling field for everybody to understand, to come into the conversation, and to understand that there are so many aspects for us to learn about each other. There's only so much that you can see about my identity by looking at it, right? Oftentimes people don't even know that I'm trans until I open up my mouth and tell them, right? So not making assumptions about people's identities, being able to come into the conversation and saying that I don't know it all and having a willingness to learn is different than cultural competency, which is really around developing a skill set and understanding that there are just different cultures, right? So, one kind of takes it to another level of connection, once again, tapping into that empathy space and that interconnectedness space and saying that cultural humility is so important for us to have in order for us to truly practice and understand the aspects around intersectionality. I'm going to share this quote by Audre Lorde that I love. Black queer scholar and practitioner, writer, poet, just phenomenal person. And she simply says that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not lead single issue lives, right? For me, this quote perfectly sums up intersectionality, right? There is no way for us to talk about particular aspects around struggle, particular aspects around discrimination, because we do not walk around only in our single identities, right? All of these identities are intersecting with each other at the same time, and we shouldn't have to parse these things out for people to understand that equity has to be achieved, right? So in order for us to understand intersectionality, we have to understand that people's struggles are not single issue struggles, because we are not, walking around leading these single issue lives. I'm going to show a chart that I feel like is very helpful. And I don't know if you've seen this in other sessions, but I do think that it is able to understand when we're talking about intersectionality, we have to talk about power, we have to talk about privilege. We also have to talk about all the differing layers of what we might be thinking about as a person's identity. So I try to show this in presentations because one is it is a perspective that I personally teach from and that I personally educate from, but it also gives us information around intersectionality, right? Around systems of oppression, around systems of domination and discrimination. And as example in Black feminism, which oftentimes argues that the experience of being a Black woman cannot be understood in terms of being just Black or just a woman, right? Because this work, and we'll get into this a little bit later, comes from literally understanding and understanding how Black women intersect and understood legal laws and legality, that we can't consider these things independently, but we have to include their interactions, which oftentimes reinforce each other, right? So we want to be able to honor, I'm going to honor that, Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who came up with this term. This is not a term that just popped up in the 2000s, right? She was writing about this stuff in the 80s, right? So when we talk about nothing is new under the sun, nothing is truly new under the sun. And so when, Kimberly Crenshaw, she says that this theory suggests and asks us to examine how biological, social, cultural aspects around gender, race, and class contribute to multiple aspects around systemic injustice and social inequality. So we have to have conversations around power. We have to have conversations around access to resource. And, we want to be able to center when we're talking about people's identities and lives, that it is connected to these differing aspects around privilege, domination, oppression, and resistance, and that there are so many different aspects to when we talk about privileged identities versus oppression and resistance identities, that we oftentimes are not thinking about who's unattractive. We're not thinking about skin color. We're not thinking about people who might be infertile. We're not thinking about all of these different levels of identity. So when we talk about or think about, just different things that are happening within our society that maybe call something within us and that we know, once again, nothing is new under the sun, right? When we're talking about aspects of, for instance, of George Floyd and police brutality, and we're having and our students are coming into our classrooms, and we might be wondering why there is a deadening silence in the class, and there is no actual aspect for a holding space or opening up, right? People are holding these things within themselves. They don't check them at the door. They don't leave just because they're now sitting in your classroom. These are things that people carry along with them because they are literally tied to their identities. And I believe that this chart helps us understand that we can't just parse these things out, that people, once again, are bringing their whole selves with them when they're sitting in Zoom classroom spaces or in physical spaces, right? I'm going to show this video that there is this great project called Race Forward. This video is a little old, but I think that it captures, people are telling their individual stories, and I think that we don't harp enough on getting to people's stories and understanding if we just actually sit down and listen to people, some of these frameworks would not be so complicated, right? I love to hear Kimberly Crenshaw. I've actually had the privilege of listening to her lecture about intersectionality, and she talks about kind of the how simplistic it is, right, in terms of a concept, right, and that it is a framework and a holding framework for people's actually complex identities and their lives. So once again, with the definition here, we're going to have somebody on video kind of talk about intersectionality as it relates to their own personal identities and hear a little bit more. So this video is about 4 minutes, and I hope you are able to enjoy.
Lady Dane Figueroa Aditi, performance artist, goddess, ancient jazz priestess of Mother Africa. Race and gender. Race and class. So I'm a Black, Indigenous, Cuban, Nigerian American woman who's trans. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. I come from the ghettos of Baltimore. People have to understand what all of the histories of all of those identities in order to understand really my positionality within the world. There are poor Black people, there are rich Black people, there are Black cis women, there are Black trans women. And so intersectionality is telling us that we have to discuss race in particular, right? Like, because that's the topic that I'm using. Like, if we're talking about race, that we have to talk about it in its full scope. Yes, we are sharing an experience because, for example, two Black people, we're sharing this experience because we're both Black, but I'm a Black trans woman. And so numbers don't lie, and we all know that Black trans women in particular are some of the most marginalized in our community and the most affected by structural oppression. There's this concept that we are all given the same opportunities, but it's not true. If we look historically and we talk about, this idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, Black people actually did pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But we then have places like Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. There was thriving Black neighborhoods, Black people buying from Black businesses, owning Black businesses, investing in Black businesses. Right, and that's what they're told. All you have to do is be rich and nobody can ever hurt you again. All you have to do is buy into the system and move upward and you'll be safe. What then happened was their white neighbors would then come and literally commit acts of genocide. And so now today, right, we have people who could have had old money who are now poor. And so what is that psychologically saying to these people? That when you thrive, when you succeed, you're still not safe. And so we're talking about race and class, and we're not understanding the history of race and class as it presents itself in America in particular, because that's where we're living, right? And we're having a fool's conversation. If someone comes to me and they say to me, you are creating differences, I would say, no, that's actually not true. Because in my indigenous cultures, people who were different were still essential to society. Within European cultures, particularly within the rise of patriarchy and the way that it manifests through religion, is that differences little by little were no longer celebrated and they were stamped out. And the one thing that structural oppression gives us that we should all aspire to generally is of a cis, het, white man. So when we're talking about intersectionality, right? I'm always being an intersectional being because I'm all of these things always at once. If you're having a conversation with me and you're not having a conversation understanding that I come with all of those identities within the conversation, then how are we supposed to move forward?
All right. Shout out to her. I love that conversation. It's called Race Forward. I think she's a phenomenal speaker. And she's from right around our backyard, right? She's from Baltimore. So, I appreciate hearing people talk about their lived experience, right? And to take these very complicated concepts and talk about their lived experience, right? And it breaks down kind of that theory and that headspace for us to understand what it looks like for people in their lived realities. So lastly, why is all of this important, right? Because truly, if we are, I talk about this work in terms of how important it is to come from a trauma-informed lens, right? Understanding that our identities bring legacies of harm with them, that they are connected and interconnected to histories that might have harmed us, or generational trauma that might have occurred. And our classroom spaces are literally, with intentionality, can be, holding spaces or holding environments for our students. And so understanding that one, that trauma is an emotional state of discomfort and stress that results from memories of extraordinary and catastrophic experiences that oftentimes shatters the survivor's sense of individuality, of harm, rendering acutely vulnerable to stressors. And, one of the things around evolution, and research shows us that evolution oftentimes favors anxious genes. And our students who are coming to us are oftentimes, come with differing levels of mental health, differing levels of experience around racial trauma, around minority stress. So all of these aspects are really important for us to understand that some of our survival as a species depends on the recognition of danger, and then sometimes our avoidance of it, right? And so our students are coming with these things. And so for your students, especially for those students whose lives are in the margins, people are going to typically move from a place of survival. And the way to shift our presence in these environments is learned behavior, but to also remember that some of this happens with, without a person being conscious of it, right? So it is, what I'll say, it is not your initial, responsibility to figure out where this reaction stems from, when we talk about trauma, when we talk about minority stress. But it is, to be trauma informed is to be able to accommodate it within your space, right? How do we accommodate for people's differing levels of identity, for people's differing levels of humanity? And this is what it's called, creating a safe holding environment for your students. So, the holding environment was actually created by a psychotherapist. And, this theory comes around, almost like a security blanket. How are we able to create holding environments within our students that transfers within the classroom spaces? So, some of the aspects, there are 6 components around doing this. First, you have to be dependable. So be available when you say you will, right? Being reliable. Students oftentimes, have kind of we talk about it in student affairs as this cooling off and cooling on effect, right? Things that will cool off our students and the things that will cool them on. And, the things that will cool off or cause students to not be retained within the institutions is, seeing the institution and seeing folks within the institution as not being reliable. Being supportive, once again, understanding, having empathy, having warmth, creating, a container, right? So how do we create check-ins and intentional check-ins, not ignoring things that are happening within our society or within the news, but holding spaces for our students either within office hours or within actual physical classroom spaces. Being a good enough practitioner, right? Fighting against the idea that, we have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to continuously strive to being a good practitioner, tapping into that emotionality and that empathy space. And, when we talk about if you get to a higher level of care, being able to know what your resources are, understanding what maybe different protocols for the university is as it relates to getting folks different resources, what offices to connect them to, and to know that, regardless, that everything within your space, the classroom space, matters. Building rapport happens as soon as people walk in that door or come into a virtual space. And, when they open up their laptop, when they come into the classroom, and as someone who is experiencing being marginalized in the greater world, you need to be able to, I know that I look for small clues within the space is it safe for me to approach? Is this space for me? Is this a space that I can be healthy and whole? And so even little cues, right? Like putting your pronouns, right? Things like that, that allow people to say, okay, I see myself and this feels like a little bit safer for me to actually honor my identities here or have my identities honored, really makes a large difference in how students are able to learn, right? So this is beyond just making people feel comfortable and good. This is actually allowing people to be their best selves so they can be the best learners. And you all can be, kind of in the best practice of teaching these folks and being in spaces with them and leading them through that learning process. So I've talked a lot. I want to be in community and conversation with you all. That concludes my presentation. And so I just want to thank you all so much for the opportunity. I laid some heavy topics. I see that the chat is going off. I haven't been able to open it because I've been presenting it. So I'm ready to engage. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay, so I can see everybody and we can all be together. Is that cool?
So Dr. Bailey, we do have a couple of questions that came up in the chat already. If it's okay just to start off with those folks, and then people can keep adding to the chat or share out once those are answered. So one just now came in saying, what if putting my pronouns could alienate some students?
Right. And oftentimes, people talk about, how do we hold the full humanity of everybody within the space? Not everybody being comfortable with pronouns and all of that. But I think if we're going to be in a learning environment, I think it is a prime opportunity to explain why pronouns are in the space at all, right? It is a simple aspect. I have, when I open my classroom spaces, I simply say, I put my pronouns out there so you all know how to refer to me. That's it. And I think sometimes people will try to make it more complicated or to say that this isolates me and things like that. And that's totally fine. But this is not around politics. This is around literally, how do I refer to you? And I don't want to make any assumptions, and I don't want people to make assumptions about me. And so I would much rather you not make assumptions about me and who I am and put people's pronouns out there. And so I think oftentimes a one sentence explanation kind of deads that in terms of the spaces that I've been in. And when people have pushback on pronouns, I just say, well, I just want to know what to refer to you as, and that's it. That's pretty much it. That's how I negotiate pronouns in the space. And I let folks know this is not a requirement, right? I don't force people to put their pronouns there. I put my pronouns in as an example, and I say that this is a good practice for us to be in community with one another, so we know how to refer to each other. That's it. It is a challenge by choice, but I'm, as the person who is creating the holding environment and the person who is leading by example, I'm going to put my pronouns in the space because literally there's no risk to me. There's no harm that's going to come to me by putting my pronouns out there. So that's typically how I explain it.
We did get a couple of shout outs from you that accidentally came directly to me. So people just saying that that's a really helpful explanation, a great explanation, and that they want to try it. So I know that they're not in the full chat. I'm not going to chat out everybody, but those are coming to me directly accidentally. So
okay, great.
So go ahead, Kathy, and then we have one more question from the chat that I want to make sure that I bring up.
No, I just want to say that is a simple, concrete solution or a strategy that we can use in the classroom. And I appreciate that because this is such a really big topic. And I know a lot of us are struggling. What can we do that is simple, easy, and yet effective? And I think this is a great strategy to do that. Yeah,
for sure. Right. And to honestly just honor, that's just one aspect around somebody's identity is their gender identity. But to at least to say, I have some knowledge that there are different identities in this space because I did something simple like putting my pronouns there, right? And so that might be, opening up an entry point for other people to say, maybe this professor gets it, right? And maybe I can open up a little bit more, or maybe, I've had people actually disclose to me and come out to me who are trans in the space after I've done that, right? I wasn't going to do this until I saw this. And so this is, not just to focus on trans folks, but I do think that it is important, particularly because this is a whole other training session, but particularly because people can shift and move their pronouns depending upon how safe they feel in spaces, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I can tell you that for me, when I added in pronouns to my syllabus and then put it in the Canvas site, right? So your students are able to add that into Canvas site. And when I did it, so many of my students did it. So even, they just immediately kind of went in. And so I will tell you, especially for those of you that are teaching undergraduates, this is not an unusual thing for them to see. So
yeah, for sure. And we're seeing LinkedIn, other places like, that are just doing it. So it's here, so, particularly folks in this generation are not unfamiliar with the concept of potentially seeing different pronouns in different spaces, particularly digital spaces.
Absolutely. We also got a question saying that as a faculty member, they feel concerned about marginalized students who also have learning differences. So do you have any guidance around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when, I talk about, when you talk about learning differences in terms of, are we talking about their honoring their identities in terms of their learning differences, or people trying to understand intersectionality as a concept and having different learning differences?
Well, actually, Wendy, you have your hand raised and this was your share out. So if you want to expand on it a little bit.
I was just thinking about students, some students who have learning differences as far as, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, those sorts of, and 99% of the time we don't know what those are, right? Because we just get the accommodation letter, which is fine, none of my business. If you want to tell me, that's fine. But I get concerned that they don't. I've had some of them that are sort of hesitant to share because they don't want one other thing that marginalizes them. But that particular one is especially important in school because, they talk about being a crutch, and I try to explain to them about leveling the playing field and that sort of thing. So I'm very curious if you have any sort of guidance in that direction.
Yeah.
Something else that I wanted to ask you too, but I'll let you, let's start with that one.
Yeah. Learning differences and just invisible identities are so hard to plan for, right? And, kind of the approach that when I've taught classes, is that first day is so important for setting the tone. And how critical it is not just to walk through the syllabus, but how important it is for people to understand that you even know that invisible identities are out there, right? So to say, to walk through, and when you're talking about your accessibility statement, also honoring the fact and saying that there might be folks here who have invisible identities, and I want you to know that this space is for you as well. And if you need accommodations, or if you have yet to have access to get tested for those accommodations, because oftentimes minoritized students do not have the resources to get tested and do things like that, we can get you connected to X, Y, and Z resources, right? And so, I think the tone setting at the beginning is really important, as well as, thinking about what different modalities you might be teaching from. Are these sessions or even, worksheets or whatever you might be doing for different modalities for learning in your class, are they truly accessible? And I know that, working with, I know that UMD is hiring an ADA coordinator and all of that. So being able to work with offices to say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm creating the most accessible space that I can. This is why these staff members are here to help you think through, how to create accessible holding spaces for students. So I would say that first day tone setting, and then working with campus partners to ensure that thinking about activities that you might be going through and things like that are accessible to the different learning modalities within the space.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I do try to do that on the first day, but I think it will definitely move to if any of you and Darren, I also ask, what do you wish that I knew about you? I guess what I wanted to share is that a couple of semesters ago, I had a student whose pronouns were she, he, and I had never seen that before. And I sort of pondered what to do about it. And finally, I had a meeting with the student about something else. And at the end, I just said, hey, by the way, I noticed your pronouns are he, she. Is there something you prefer? Do you prefer to be called by both of them? Like, just let me know. And I'm happy to, go with whatever you prefer. And the student kind of laughed and said, well, what that means to me is that I don't care. I identify with both. And so whatever you call me, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm okay with that. But then the student said, but I really appreciate your asking and clarifying. And I think that's really the key, right? Is like, if you don't know, or if you mess up, or if you do whatever, it's about admitting to the student, hey, help me out, and letting them actually explain to you what it is that they're trying to communicate and what it is that they are, that they want you to recognize and, respect.
Yeah. And just how powerful it was for that student just to have kind of a check-in. Yeah, you saw
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, and I can't show my face, but thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. Wendy, thank you so much for that testimony. I think that if I look at the last couple of days that we're having, I want to build on the conversation that we had yesterday that Pratiti, who represent just pretty much all of the faculty in terms of the desire to teach and also make sure that we are teaching for all. And I think what Wendy did is a perfect example of, she was meeting with the students for content. And hey, by the way, and it's one of those things, a perfect example. Look, let's you and I talk after we finish talking about our classroom knowledge. Can I just take a pause and just talk to you about the he, she? I mean, that's a perfect example of having a discerning spirit, like seeing the language and even just saying, okay, I'm going to find a moment to have this conversation. Maybe not today, but I'm going to definitely find a moment. And so that's why I say it's not a formula. It's one of you filling out when is the proper time to bring this up. So thank you so much, Wendy. I just had to just chime in. I probably violated some kind of raising of the hands, but I just wanted to chime in.
No, totally not a violation, right? I think it's what you just shared is so important, right? And why I think the interconnectedness and why I talk about emotionality is so important. And you talk about that discernment, right? You have to have a certain spiritual attunement to know, what feels right for you, right? And being able to connect with students around content, I think it's definitely a perfect example.
I have a question.
Sure.
I teach a lot of international students, and there are likely to be aspects of their identity that I don't know what they mean. So for instance, I have students from China, and if they say they're from a certain part of China, I have no context for that. So what do I do with that?
What do you want to do with that?
I mean, I want to understand them.
Yeah.
But I don't even understand, if they're Americans and they say I'm from Kansas, at least I have some idea of what Kansas means. But, if they say I'm from Hunan, beyond the food there, I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. And I think, that's such a perfect example of like, I've done many trainings, particularly for like, orientations and international students and understanding that if you have opportunities, for connection, there have been times when students have shared aspects of their identity and they say, next time we have office hours, I want to talk to you more about that. And I want to learn a little bit more, right? And that's it, because, that might put a student on the spot. They might be like, I don't want to open up about myself, I'm just here to learn, whatever. But I think, just having kind of a natural curiosity and being able to listen to them and to say, you know, I acknowledge that we are not from the same place or even culturally have the same kind of understanding of, you know, just different aspects of identity. And I want to learn more. The next time we have an opportunity to connect, let's talk. That's it. You know, at least for me. You know, and because I also acknowledge that it's also very difficult and nearly impossible to understand each and every aspect of your student's identity and where they're coming from and who they are, right? But I think it's around how do you create a holding environment in your classroom spaces for people to be comfortable enough to be themselves.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, shoot. So I'm going to chime right on back in. I have a question.
Sure.
And actually, it's not even a question. I just want you to just sort of react to a situation that I encountered through our Smith Business Association. This actually is a perfect example, to be honest with you, of the things of a live case. So the Smith Business Academy is a program for Black and Latinx business men. And it was founded in 2012. It's a phenomenal group. They travel, I mean, they boast on like 100% job placement rate. It's from freshmen to seniors. It's like a 4-year program. The seniors mentor the freshmen. And last year, I think, Dr. Snyder, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's 2 years ago, but at any rate, as a couple of Latinx students were about to graduate, they met with me 2 years. That's okay. They met with me as they're about to graduate. Now, if you from afar, they had a fantastic experience, and they did. They met with me because they wanted to prepare for the new generation of students coming in, because they were strong enough to not really go into the things that they faced during the 4-year journey, the trip rides up to New York, the business students chiming and making comments throughout the trips and at the hotel and making them feel, okay, you know what, you're saying some things that really is just sort of disrespectful to the other part of who I am within this Black community, but they never brought it up until they're about to graduate. And so we had a meeting with the entire group, because my thought is, we might as well address this before you leave. I need for you to go into that space and tell them how you are feeling. And it was deep, Dr. Bailey. I mean, I'm telling you, it was tense. It was the trans SBA member saying, you know, I didn't feel comfortable, to be honest with you, in this space, because the space didn't allow me to feel comfortable to tell you that, you know, this is who I am. Then you had the other side saying, well, how are we going to ever know if you don't ever tell us? And so it was a really tense moment. And I think at the end, there were no solutions. But I mean, it was basically I liked what at the very beginning of the empathy, trying to understand where you are. And I think that's where we left, because we're teaching our business students how to empathize. And the students were basically saying, if you can just sort of try to get into my head for a moment and understand my journey. And I think that's where we left, and that's where we are now. Since then, we have diversity officers within the Business Academy. We are welcoming them. We are very open. But my point is, that's how I actually learned, Dr. Bailey, about what intersectionality is from the standpoint of me being Black man. It was an educational moment for me. But I bring that up because I wanted the faculty in particular to know that it's ongoing forever. I don't know nearly as much as I want to know. But that moment 2 years ago really was an aha moment, because I thought I was doing good, you know, and I was actually teaching them from the standpoint of a Black man, when at the end of the day, I actually contributed to the environment, not intentionally, but, you know, I didn't really help the students come out. The last thing I'll say is, it was a gift, as Dr. Snyder says, for the students to come to me. They could have graduated and never told me anything, and we will never know. So I thank them for the gift that they gave me that allowed them to go back to that space and educate those students. And now the whole vibe of the academy has shifted. And it was because of those students. Just wanted to just bring that up as a testimony.
I love that. And I love that you were able to share that. And, I think that, not only is a marker of talking about empathy and intersectionality, but cultural humility,
Right, right.
and being able to be in that space and to say, you know what, I don't know it all and I'm learning. And absolutely, it's ongoing. I tell people when I was in college, we weren't having these conversations around, trans identity in the same ways that we are now. I couldn't even own being a non-binary person and using that language until much later, right? So we have to kind of exercise this empathy and understanding that these things are forever evolving, right? And to be learners ourselves. So thank you for sharing that.
Wendy added one comment in the chat that I think is particularly apt for folks in this room, because it's sort of the next wave of business people that you all are teaching. And so every sort of mini lesson that you take from your students, they bring forward into the workforce with them as well. There was a question earlier. I do want to acknowledge it is 11, so please don't worry about offending us if you have to go. We understand you have meetings and lives. Kathy, you did have a question around, you see more attention on social media around the vaccine, anti-vaxxers versus those who take the vaccine. How can I address this tension in the classroom? So Dr. Bailey, I'm going to hand that to you, but just for a reminder that there is the vaccine mandate at the University of Maryland. So not likely to be something you straight away have to address in the classroom, but still a great question for Dr. Bailey.
Yeah, and as somebody who is over the Department for Bias Incidents and, just what we've been seeing in terms of the language that's being used around anti-vaxxers and the vaccine and all of that, we've already been getting some concerns from faculty and staff members. And, one is yes, we do have the policies and to lean on those policies, but to acknowledge that tension, right? Like, I understand that we are coming back to a classroom space that we're not all on the same page about. This is how we can keep each other safe. This is what the university has mandated. I understand that this might not be in alignment with what other folks believe, but this is how we're going to keep each other safe, right? So there might be folks in the space that might be wearing masks. There might be folks who, things like that. So I think being able to acknowledge that tension, once again, is kind of the biggest step that you can take. Not necessarily going into a whole conversation about it, but I do think that being able to, once again, that first day is really important, right? We just are coming off, we're still in it, but coming off of a pandemic. And, to act like we're not, I think would be a miss, right? So people have not, some of our students have had no interaction with other folks on campus, right? So I think it's really important just to acknowledge where we've come from and what tension might be lying in and what the policies are saying. So that's what I would do.
Thank you.
Can I make an announcement? And I'm going to invite, maybe Darren, you can send it to all of the faculty and staff who have been attending, that the student who's now an alum, the one of the two who graduated and he's now at PepsiCo. This student is, the pronouns are they, them, and theirs. And phenomenal student. I tell you, he walked into Van Munchen with his suit decked, and at night he was living his true part of his other side. And he's written a book about his life and his story. And he's doing a book club with the Smith Business Academy, and they're going to open it up to the community. And so I will share that book. It's a short book about his life, but it also is a true education as to what Dr. Bell has been talking about this past hour in terms of intersectionality as well. And he's our first alum who actually, well, I tell you, it's one of those things that you just got to keep going. They will be coming back to facilitate a dialogue. It's not going to be it'll be an hour dialogue, but I'll invite you to participate so you can hear their story.
That would be excellent, Victor. Send their resources and their book And we'll make sure that everybody in attendance gets access to that as well. Dr. Bailey, I hope you have a chance to check the chat, because there are so many people saying so many lovely things about how powerful this was, how much they were learning from this session. In terms of sort of following up from us, we're going to share some documentation with you that we're going to share with everybody in attendance. So you could double check all the references and resources and make sure it sort of matches what you want everybody to take home with them. But we are so appreciative of your time. This was incredible. And I think was going to help all of us as we walk into our
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much for inviting me. I appreciate being invited into the space and just being in community with you all. Thank you so much.